Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Delphi Talks, a series of live talks on the theme of storytelling. Before I introduce our guests today, I'll do a lightning bit of housekeeping, particularly for first-time visitors to the platform. You might be logging in, seeing lots of different buttons and wondering exactly what to do. So I'm just going to point to the ones that you really need to know about. If you click the seating button at the top of the screen, then it will give you options to sit down here in the theatre with the rest of us. And when you are sitting down, you will then see there's a stand-up button at the bottom of the screen. If you look at the bottom left of your screen, you'll see there's a chat window with lots of different channels in there, including a Delphi one, which is chatting in this region. Feel free to ask any questions you have there, and also ask for support if you get stuck in a corner behind a tree or anything like that. One of our support team will come and help you. There is in the theatre, you will also see some buttons at the top of the screen for things like room, speaker, montage, screen. Those are sort of camera controls. They'll take you to your camera to look at the screen or at different sort of shots in the region. Again, if you click on any of those and then you want to get your camera back to a sort of standard third-person view behind your avatar. Again, there's a look away button at the bottom of your screen, which you can use. So hopefully that's a very brief introduction to the controls that new users will use as we welcome them here. There is also, if you're in the theatre area, a clap button at the top of the screen, which we discovered last week makes a kind of weird squeaky sound like fireworks going off a long way off when everybody claps at once. So we'll unleash that in a moment as we welcome our guests, the writer and producer of Loving Vincent and the executive producer of the film. So please, everyone, spam the clap button for Hugh Welchman and Ivan McTaggart.
I'd like to also promote myself to co-director and Ivan to producer.
Yay! Promotion so soon.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we said last week that we got a sort of weird squeaky noise out of that thing, and we're going to have to keep working on the applause system. So thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Ivan, for logging in and welcome. Hugh, I know you are in a different country every night at the moment, launching this film. I think you're joining us tonight from Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
Yeah, Washington tonight. Not another country tomorrow, but New York tomorrow. So.
New York tomorrow. So if we hear police in the background, which we did do a while ago, that's just the usual sort of flora and fauna of Washington D.C. taking place.
Exactly.
And Ivan, as an executive producer, or indeed a producer, I'm assuming that you're sitting on a super yacht somewhere, lighting cigars with $100 bills. Is that right?
Yeah, either that or in my bedroom at home in Cambridge, one or the other.
One of the other two. Okay, fine. All right. So we're delighted to welcome you both. You're here to tell us, obviously, about your new film, extraordinary film, Loving Vincent. And then we're going to take the audience in world on a tour of the exhibition that we've set up of some of the artwork. Pardon me, from the film. First, though, I'm going to ask Sean to play the trailer on the screen above us for this amazing film. So everybody who wants to, if you click that screen button at the top of your screen, that will zoom in on the trailer. And remember, there's the look away button at the bottom when you want to look away. I haven't actually added a separate volume control for that stream, so it might come through a fraction louder than our voices do, just to let you know. Okay, screen.
Vincent van
Sean,
Gogh
if you
killed
want to
himself.
let that roll.
How does a man go from calm to suicidal in 6 weeks?
So, what brings you to over there?
I want to do something for Vincent.
You're not going to stir things up again, are you? You've had quite enough weeping over that nutcase.
His neighbours and the police and the whole town against an ill man.
Vincent, what have you done?
We all knew something was very wrong.
Vincent! Great artists are not peaceful souls. That is the price of your path. Is it worth it? Did he change his mind? Did he want to live after all?
You want to know so much about his death. But what do you know of his life?
I would like to show by my work what this nobody has in his heart.
Your loving Vincent.
Great. So hopefully everybody was able to see that okay. I'm sure it came through fine. So Loving Vincent, a feature film composed from 65,000 oil paintings, created by a team of 125 fine artists. So Hugh, you woke up one morning and decided oil painting every frame of a full-length feature film was a good idea. At some point, though, presumably you realized you didn't have time to paint the entire thing yourself.
Well, I actually woke up next to my wife, who was the one who had the idea of painting every frame of a film. And at the time, it was a short film, and she did want to paint the entire film herself. It was going to be a 7-minute short film. But once we did the calculation, because I was persuading her to do it as a feature film, we realised it would take her 81 years to paint it herself. So we probably needed some help. And so, yeah, we started down that road. And yeah, on the surface, it's a crazy thing to do, to hand paint every frame of a film. And the reason we thought it wasn't crazy was because people are crazy about Vincent. And there was a seminal moment for me when which was part of the way through our discussions about whether we should try and do it as a feature film or not. And I went to an exhibition about Vincent's letters, which had inside the exhibition old copies of letters. And there was a 3.5-hour queue to get in. And I thought, you know, if people will queue for 3.5 hours to see old letters and a couple of the paintings in between, then there was probably quite a big fan base out there who would want to see a film that was entirely painted, bringing Vincent's paintings to life.
Yes, I can imagine. So I don't want to get too drawn into a conversation about the technique and the methodology of making the film, because not least because I'm sure that our community here will have questions about that as we move to the Q&A. And I want to get as quickly as we can to the tour and to take everybody around the artwork and get sort of immersed in the characters and the stories. You talk about that huge sort of heat that still exists around this artist, and it must have been an immense sense of sort of responsibility taking on, curating in a way his vision through this community of other artists that were painting the film for you. I just have one question before we go and explore the paintings. You must have obviously had a really powerful vision of this film when you started the process. I wonder, now that you've got the finished work in your hands, how does it compare with your original vision? Is it completely different, or is it what you imagined?
Well, again, the original vision was Dorota's, I think it's very close to, in terms of the look of the film, it's very, very close to what she had in mind at the very beginning. And, she was telling me about what she wanted to do, and I didn't quite get what she wanted to do. So I said, well, look, let's do a test. So we did this test in 2012, where we were using friends instead of actors and bed sheets instead of green screens. And we got three local painters, very, very good oil painters, and used them as guinea pigs to see if we could train them rapidly in animation. And the results of that concept trailer completely persuaded me to do this film. And our film's just a better, more sophisticated version, because we did a lot of R&D, and we got better at painting animation in the way that we were doing it as we went along. And in terms of the script, we actually did in total, probably about 14 distinctive drafts of the script over 3 years. So the story developed a lot over that 3 years. And the final film is very, very different from the original script.
In terms of the narrative, that's interesting. And that original short, Ivan, am I right? Did you use that to do the crowdfunding element of the production budget of this?
That was the main bit of that was the main bit of footage or sort of proof of concept that was around in order to do that.
Yeah.
But I've got to say as well, it's that short concept trailer got so many people on board the project. It got me on board the project, and Trademark Films, with a UK co-producer. And I remember sitting down with Hugh in Soho House, and he said, "Look, we've got this animation." And I said, "Well, let me stop you there. We don't do animation." And he showed me that trailer, and it was, okay, now we do animation. Where do we sign? It really was, it was quite arresting. And it's still on YouTube, so people can see it. I think that's right, isn't it, Hugh? It's still there.
Yeah, we didn't take it down. It's kind of nostalgia and history.
It's really worth seeing. It's amazing what you were able to do, as you say, with Bed Sheets and Friends and so on. The power of that short piece of footage really has has resonated over many years.
Yeah, it saw us through the whole 5 years, really.
Okay, so we now want to get yourselves and our audience here to go on a tour of the virtual exhibition that we've created. So for those of you, again, who are new, the key thing you need to do if you're sitting down at the moment is click stand up. And then obviously you can use your arrow keys to walk around. If you need to jump over somebody, like I'm jumping over Austin from Edinburgh there, then it's the space bar. But if you follow us, we'll go up to the exhibition space itself. If you're listening to this and you are just logging in and you're wondering where the exhibition space is, it does load after you logged in. So you might see a little loading bar in the top right. That will be the exhibition space loading. But for those of you who've been in here for more than 60 seconds or so, it should be in. And we will all be very patient with Hugh, who is in world for the first time today, and complicated things like walking in a straight line are a new experience for him. I will
He's much the same in the real world.
Is he? Yes. I will teleport him to me if he gets stuck. Hugh, do you want me to teleport you up now?
That'd be great, yeah. I managed to go underneath. I can't fly through the floor.
Hold on a second. Nearby users, Hugh Welchman, and more teleport. And there we are. Great. Okay. And you can tap F to stop flying.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So the exhibition that we're going to go around is on 6 rooms. This is the first room. It has 3 pieces in it. Very broadly speaking, the order in which we see the images is kind of chronological within the film, but there's about 12 out of the 30 in the exhibition that we're particularly going to comment on. And the first one is the one that is in front of Hugh now, which is of Vincent in his bed, and it's called Bleeding Ear, which obviously is a sort of seminal moment in the well, a very famous moment in his own personal life.
You want me to comment?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
So really, what I knew about Vincent before I started doing this film is that, he cut off his ear, he went mad, and his paintings sold for lots of money. And it really is a defining moment in his life, and it's one of those facts that everyone knows. And one of the things I discovered is that there's really just a lot more to Vincent. I mean, he was a very hard-working and intelligent man, and that's really what Loving Vincent tries to show, is the different sides of Vincent van Gogh, perhaps things that people didn't know before or didn't discover from the different films that have been done before, like Lust for Life. Another thing that I like about this, so this is kind of the event that sticks in the mind of our young hero, Armand Rouland, whose father was his best friend in Arles, which is where the ear incident took place. So one of the things I like about this is it takes place in Bedroom in Arles, which is a daytime painting, and as I'm sure everyone here knows, that a lot of Vincent, or most of his later work, is very bright daytime paintings under the scorching sun. But his life is really very dark, and so we wanted to take some of his bright daytime paintings, hopeful paintings like Bedroom in Arles, and convert them into a darker, murkier world.
And this incident of him supposedly, cutting off his ear and sending it to a woman he was enamored of. You use it at the start of the story. I think it's fair to say, without giving too much away, almost to sort of make him, in the eyes of Armand, who is our protagonist, it's part of what sort of pushes Armand away from him, isn't it? It's kind of like what Armand has to overcome to become, as he becomes more involved and engaged in the story.
Yeah, Armand was 16 at the time that Vincent was living in Arles, and his father, Postman Roland, was Vincent's drinking buddy, and you can imagine what a 16-year-old would think of this odd-behaving foreigner who drank a lot and cut off his ear and probably embarrassed Armand by association. And actually, after the ear incident, Vincent was having mental health issues, and Armand's mother was so scared of him that she moved herself and her kids to the countryside. So Armand definitely would have, or most likely would have, had a pretty suspicious and negative view of Vincent, and that was actually important to us. That's why we didn't have, say, his father as the main character, because his father was a big supporter of Vincent, and we felt we needed someone who was more critical to go on a journey that perhaps he could change along that journey.
Yeah, so skeptical at the outset, as he's handed, this the sort of the, I hate to say it, but the MacGuffin of the story, the letter that he has to deliver. If we go up the stairs into the second room up here, we actually see the setting in these two images where essentially that mission is handed to him. Hugh, are you okay coming up these stairs? Do you want me to teleport you up? Or?
No, I'm here.
So these two pictures are both set in the cafe where Armand, I think Armand and his father talk about this letter. Do you want to just sort of give us a sense of what happens here?
Yeah, so there are actually two different cafes.
I apologize.
Cafe was an all-night cafe, which was very close to the Yellow House where he lived in Arles and used to spend all night drinking. The Cafe Terrace is a couple of blocks away, and Cafe Terrace at night is absolutely one of the most famous paintings that he ever did. So it was definitely going to be in our film, and we actually have it as the setting for kind of the setup for the story, where Postman is arguing with his son, his drunken ne'er-do-well son, and giving him this letter to go and take to the Van Gogh family in person with the condolences of the Roland family. And our reluctant hero is going to do what his dad tells him to do.
Yes, because he's a good boy. And but I have to say, this is it was this scene with his father, who I think is Chris O'Dowd, is the actor playing him. This scene for me was the point where I really was absolutely sort of, it was the point at which I realized that I wasn't going to be disappointed by the film, I suppose, or not that I expected to be, but this was where it was guaranteed, because the emotional depth and the subtlety and the emotional connection that came particularly from Chris O'Dowd's performance in this scene, as he sort of communicates to his son, his perceptions of perhaps how society at large had betrayed Vincent and his sort of sadness about that. It's just extraordinary performance from the actor, and also quite extraordinary how that emotion comes through the paint.
And as I said to you as well, I think, Rowan, that was all the more remarkable because we had Chris O'Dowd for half a day. Literally. So it was done at a fair pace, and Hugh and Dorota did an amazing job getting that performance out of him.
Well, I can't take any credit for it. Chris came with an incredible interpretation of it, and he really blew us all away. I mean, it was pretty powerful to have him sort of turn up, and he's sort of quite quiet and didn't really say anything, and then he gave his first performance. We're like, whoa, okay, this is going to be good.
Yeah, quite extraordinary. And as I say, I was really sort of delighted to see how that emotion came through into the painted rendering as well. It was a really special moment for me seeing that. Okay, so I'm running down the stairs into the third room now, where on this flank here, in fact, there is a picture of Chris O'Dowd, a wonderful one with a yellow background first, and then two images next to it on this, I'm going to say sort of west-facing flank for no good reason, of the Seine and the Moulin. I think you were saying that these two are particularly the same one is perhaps the most precisely comparable to the artist's original work.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got good examples here, really, because if we start with the Chris O'Dowd one on the left there, which actually, because I think Emma and you selected these, and that's actually one of the paintings that I own and I have in my house, so I'm happy to see that it's there. But this is actually that's very close to the original painting. Apart from obviously at the end of his little speech, he then picked up his brandy to have a sip, and we decided to cut at that point. So the last frames, the paintings that we have here are all last frames of the shot, because technically what we do is we paint the first frame, and then we keep painting on the same canvas until we get to the last frame of the shot. So whereas the middle one, so the bridge over Seine, is the last frame of that shot is almost identical to the original painting. And then the other one, La Moulin Galette. So this one is very similar in terms of the colours. The only difference is that you can see that we have a little invader there, which is Armand. So this was he painted this painting 2 years before he met Armand, so Armand couldn't possibly be there, but there he is in our film.
And yes, because if I remember rightly, this is essentially, it's kind of a transitional shot, isn't it, between
what happens, is Armand is sent off on this mission, and he goes to Paris to deliver the letter to Vincent's younger brother, Theo van Gogh. And so we have a nice sort of transition sequence where we get to revel in some of Vincent's wide landscapes until we get to meet the paint supplier and find out the next part of the story.
But it's a real nice moment as well, I think, for Vincent connoisseurs, because this character arrives and walks through, in miniature but identifiable, walks through a series of really iconic Vincent paintings, and it's just a real. I don't know how long it lasts. It's a matter of seconds or under a minute, but it's a real feast, that particular sequence.
Yes, and without wishing to, well, in order to do it's easier coming from me than from you guys. I should also highlight that these paintings are available on sale. The real paintings from the movie, you've put on sale, I think, and so the lovingvincent.com website. If you do want to snap up one of these, they are not as expensive as an original Van Gogh, and I have already put my hand up for one of them. Unfortunately, I couldn't get one quite as beautiful as the postman. So the next piece that we're taking a look at is Père. Now I'm going to pronounce it wrong again. Tanguy. Tanguy.
Tanguy.
Tanguy. Funnily enough, we did have John Sessions was referenced in our talk last week for his wonderful improvisational skills. Our speaker last week was a master of improvisation and was talking about the work John Sessions used to do on Whose Line Is It Anyway, where he used to do the most extraordinary monologues. And here he plays quite an extraordinary role of a sort of enormous sort of quietude. It's one of those performances that's incredibly contained and yet full of character at the same time. I think he's the art supplier to Van Gogh. Is that right?
Yeah, so Père Tanguy, he was a sort of gnarled old revolutionary who'd been put in jail during the Paris Commune and had worked in a paint factory before the Commune. And when he got let out, the factory had actually closed down. So he set up his own little paint shop, and he became very good friends and a tireless supporter of the Impressionists and the post-Impressionists. And, you know, his favourite painter was the craziest and the poorest of them all, Van Gogh. So he was Vincent had a big problem keeping friends. So he only really had two friends who he never fell out with, both of which were sort of older working class men who were obviously very, very bright and understood something about art. And yeah, Père Tanguy was one of his most faithful friends and was also one of the few people who was at his funeral. And in Paris, what happened, you'll see that there's a huge difference in colour and style between this one and La Moulin Galette. And that's because Vincent was experimenting with different techniques, and also he became totally obsessed with Japanese prints. Theo turned up because he was living in Paris. Vincent was living in Paris with Theo, his younger brother. And his younger brother was, of course, paying for everything. And Theo came home and found 1,000 Japanese prints in their house, and he wasn't that happy about there being so many. And Vincent, having gone and bought it on credit, using Theo's name, but he became obsessed with Japanese art, and the combination between learning the new techniques from the Impressionists and the example of Japanese arts led to the style which we now know as Vincent's iconic, colourful style. And here is one of the first ones which is in that new style, and it's Père Tanguy looking a bit Buddha-like against a backdrop of Vincent's Japanese prints.
Yeah, it's a very striking. The original is a very striking. The original picture of Tanguy that I've seen is very, very striking for that. As I say, sort of slightly Oriental influence. Yeah. We are approaching about halfway through the tour. I'm just going to ask people, if they haven't been doing already, to filter your questions through in the Delphi chat channel. I'll start asking some of them shortly so that we're bringing everybody into the conversation. So I have one question here, in fact, already from Mary. So this is actually just asking a little bit about the process that you underwent here, which was literally actors. I think we just Mary would like to ask about the process by which you went from actors to paintings, and that was, I'm assuming. Well, actually, I don't know. I mean, what was the mechanics of how you went from filmed footage of actors to the individual? How did the artists? Did you print onto the canvas that they painted on from the film? Or
So if you have a look at the black and white painting to the right, so this is, it's very close to the live action footage, but this is set on it's a scene where Vincent is painting one of his first oil paintings that he did on a beach in Holland in a storm, and we shot the actor against blue screen, and then we did matte paintings of sand dunes, and then we composited those together, And then on a computer, we had painting animation workstations that the painters would sit in, and they had two ways of looking at the footage. They could either like just look at it on a screen in front of them above the canvas, and so then they use that as their reference. And the other thing is that there was a projector behind their head and above them, which could project a line image onto the canvas. Now, obviously, you can see that there's a lot of detail here. So they were just using the outline as a guide for the movement, so that they could track the movement more easily. Whereas much more difficult is if we go back to looking at Père Tanguy. So John Sessions, doesn't actually look like that. He certainly doesn't have those big brushstrokes on his his head, on his face. Really, for the Vincent style paintings, and there was a light source there, but it had to be reimagined into the Vincent style. So there was a live action reference for the painter here, but they used that as the basis alongside the Vincent originals to come up with the first frame of the oil painting, and then frame by frame they could follow the outline, but they actually had to move the brushstrokes frame by frame. So if he turned his head, they would scratch out the area around his head and repaint it just a little bit of the turn, which meant moving all of the brushstrokes, and they had to keep track of all the brushstrokes, otherwise it would look like his cheeks are floating about. So it was much, the Vincent style was probably twice as difficult as the black and white style, even though both of them are oil paintings on canvas.
And so, so that really was very much I suppose, for you as an animator, a very similar process to manage, but at a much more granular level in a way to other frame stop animation processes.
Yeah. So the last two films that I did were puppet animation, and with puppet animation, you probably have, I don't know, say 30 hand impressions on the puppet each time you move it. Whereas here you have as many as you have brushstrokes. So it's just a much more painstaking process. And the reason that we did that painstaking process was because we just thought it looked much more like Van Gogh paintings, which is not really surprising because he did oil paintings on canvas, and so us doing oil paintings on canvas was the technique that just looked much better than anything else we tried.
It's funny because myself and Adam and Ivan, actually Adam, who is a part of the team here at Sine Wave, had when we were watching the shorts and the trailers and then things for this coming out, we did try to work out how you would create a shader inside a virtual world that would synthesize this kind of effect, and we didn't come up with it. It's a work in progress. We haven't worked out how to do that, but it is precisely to do with that unique.
There's actually a university department in Prague which decided, and along with Adobe, that they're going to try and come up with a program that can achieve results similar to us, and we're working with them. So we're computers are a long way from being able to emulate what we've done, but there are people who are actively working. We've set them a challenge, and now they're going to see if they can do it.
That's great. Well, as soon as they have something, we'll have to see if we can implement it in here and create that sort of living, moving sense on the that you have in the.
But I think film. Also when we talked about it, Ryan, there was the other issue. One is the brush strokes and actually rendering the colours in the way that Vincent did with his brush strokes. But the other is just the distortion of perspective and the way that he sees things, and in particular the painting painting on one of the other spaces of the Red Cafe at night. There's a billiard table in there, which is just, in fact, when we did the film, there were certain things that we built and that the actors were working with as physical props in their sets, but that was something that just physically could not be there because it wouldn't stand up and it didn't make any physical sense. And so there's a whole other realm that you
exactly like Ivan says. I mean, very often his paintings don't abide by the laws of physics, and his characters don't abide by the laws of biology, which is if it's not abiding by the rules, then that creates problems for computers.
Yes, indeed. Although we are standing on a glass panel with that's supporting about 50 people with no visible means of support whatsoever. So we are capable of defying gravity in virtual ones. But so before we come on to the next painting, I do have another question from Sean, which kind of relates to the artists again. Just any insight you can give us into the recruitment process for finding 125 oil painters. I mean, where did they come from, and how did you get them all in one place at one time working together?
Well, we had 5,000 applications from around the world, and our head of painting had to go through all of those portfolios and rate them from 0 to 5, and anyone who got 3, 4, or 5 Dorota and Piotr would go through the portfolios together, and out of 5,000 people, we invited 500 people to audition in Poland or Athens, and they were the only two places that people could audition, and they had to do a 3-day audition of a painting animation shot, and of those people, 500 who auditioned, 135 130 went on to do our intensive training course, and pretty much every one of those 130 people joined the production to do at least one shot. I mean, there were 5 or 6 people who did one shot and said, this is not for me. Sitting in a room with another 70, 80 people, that was our largest studio, and being, I mean, the painters. They tend to work on their own normally, and they tend to their job is to come up with what they want to paint and to paint it. Whereas animation is a very different world. It's like you have to follow exactly the character and the rules of animating that character. Here also you had to be true to Vincent's painting style. So that wasn't for everyone. But to be honest, I was very surprised that we probably only had something like 5% of people drop out after doing a shot, and I was expecting more like 20% would say, wow, this is not what I signed up for. And what was amazing was that the painters were really passionate about the film, and even though I'd say most of them after the film went off to do something else, it's not like they all had an epiphany and said we're going to become animators. They're all just incredibly passionate about the project and very proud of their achievement. And I think around 10% of them have gone on to work full time in animation. But I think most of them went back to painting. Most of them are painters at heart, and that's why we chose them.
Great. Yes, I do have a load more questions, but let's just move on with the guided tour. So we're standing now in front of what I think is one of the most interesting pictures. This is Armand, who is the protagonist, that young man who is charged with delivering the letter and finds himself sort of pulling the drains up on the last days of Vincent's life. But in this shot in particular, in this painting in particular, we're seeing, I think of it as sort of a transitional shot, but it's a reflection, isn't it? We're seeing him and the reflection of the town through, because he's in a train.
Yeah, he's in a train looking out. He's coming to Auvers-sur-Oise, which is the place where Vincent lived for the last 10 weeks before his fatal wounding and then subsequent death after that 2 days later. So this is where it happened, and our hero arrives here. And this, we looked at the other paintings. The last 3 paintings we looked at are incredibly close to the originals. This has nothing to do with any painting apart from you can see a bit of church at Auvers in the background. And Vincent never painted reflections, but one of the things we were very excited to do is to try and think, what would a reflection in a window on a train look like if Vincent painted it? So that's a challenge that we set to our one of our design painters, and I think he did a fantastic job of it. And this one will certainly never be up for sale.
Right. Okay. I didn't see it on the website, and I can understand why. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was an amazing moment in the film when that that sort of fluidity of the two shots comes together. And Armand himself, I should say to everybody here that the reason I am got up rather fetchingly in a Homburg hat and the closest I can get from our in-world wardrobe to a sort of Humphrey Bogart look is because when we first talked about this film, you were telling me about the sort of the inspirations for it. One of the references you made was film noir and Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, which is kind of, LA crime fiction. And I really just didn't quite, because I hadn't seen the film yet, quite register how that reference could make sense in a period piece about an oil painter. But Armand is really the personification of that, isn't he? Because he is the investigator, and you've created a character here who very much doesn't fit into the sort of the sort of typical staid sort of merchant ivory approach to a period drama.
Absolutely. I mean, the core of this film was always bringing the portraits of people that Vincent knew to life to give their view, their story about Vincent, what he was like, what happened to him. And, so we had a lot of one-to-one interview situations in the film. And so, which is not on the face of it, the most dramatic situation for a film. But there's one genre of film which is brilliant at one-to-one interviews and making them really interesting, which is film noir, because you normally have a reluctant detective who gets sucked into some kind of situation that he doesn't really want to be in, and has these amazing scenes with cracking, fizzing dialogue between him and one other person, and he has to kind of work out, who's telling the truth and who's sucking him into some inevitable danger. So it just happened that was the genre which suited our storyline. And another thing which actually inspired it was the Armand Rouland, and he was a great hero for us compared to, say, Père Tanguy or Postman Rouland, because there's actually things written about Postman Rouland and Vincent and Père Tanguy in the historical record, but there's about 5 sentences that we could find that's ever been written about Armand Rouland. So he was a blank sheet that we could create how we wanted. But one of the things that we do know about him is that he was, when Vincent knew him, he was an apprentice blacksmith, and then sometime after that he actually became a gendarme.
Oh, he became fabulous.
He became a policeman. Okay. And, that also defines some other things about him is at the time, the French government only hired very tall people to be gendarmes because they were like the projection of state power in the regions. So we knew that Armand must have been pretty tall because he was a gendarme, and also his dad was pretty much a giant because he was 2 meters high, which was the equivalent of a giant in southern France in 1890.
Well, he has presence in the film, but he also absolutely personifies that slightly sort of louche or not louche, but sort of like just very sort of casual. You can absolutely imagine him sort of kind of having a toothpick in his mouth, or hands. It's slouching. He's a sloucher, isn't he? But full of confidence at the same time.
And also he's a bit rough, and Vincent always used to seek out the roughest underbellies of a place, the kind of seediest parts of wherever he lived, and Arles was an army town. There was some big murders just when Vincent arrived there, between the Italian immigrant community and the soldiers. And he used to hang out at the brothels. So and Armand actually lived in that kind of rough area, so that also defined in part his character. And then Vincent painted this incredible yellow jacket on him, which it was almost certainly not yellow, the jacket, because I can't imagine a 16-year-old wearing a bright yellow jacket. But Vincent used to change the colours in front of him at will, just to get the complementary colour choices that he wanted. But the fact that Armand has this bright yellow jacket, we're like, whoa, he must have been pretty confident. So that choice that Vincent made actually sort of defined his character as this tall, very confident, but someone with the testy testosterone of youth. He would have been like 18, 19 at the time of our film.
Yeah, he's a great character and is a wonderful sort of a protagonist to lead us through the story. So I'm just going to take us down to what is now, I think, the fourth room. I want to make sure we don't get too lost in discussion. So if we go down here, we're now looking at Adeline. While we're coming down, do you want to just talk us through? So this is you were saying really Adeline is the closest we have. She's another very important character in the story, the closest we have to a sort of an eyewitness to what actually happened at around Vincent's death.
Yeah, so Adeline Revaux was at the time that Vincent arrived back at the Revaux Inn, mortally wounded, and then he was at the Revaux Inn for 2 days. She was the daughter of the innkeeper, and he did two paintings of her. Vincent wasn't very good at judging people's ages necessarily, so he thought that she was 16. She was one of only 5 people that he painted that said something about Vincent after Vincent died. And she gave this testimony when she was 76. So 60 years after the event took place, saying what happened around his shooting, and this is what many accounts are based on is her testimony. So she's a very important character in the film and in terms of Vincent's history.
Fabulous. Okay, let's keep moving on because I do want to make sure we have time for some interaction and questions at the end. If we come up the stairs and look on the left, we've got a piece here. Now, we did look briefly at one of the black and white paintings before, but you haven't talked us through the sort of the way in which black and white was used specifically to signal the past in the story. This piece here, we're looking back at Vincent on his deathbed after he has been shot or shot himself.
So, I mean, the reason that we have the black and white is 3 reasons. One is we didn't want to make up paintings that Vincent paintings that didn't exist, and obviously, Vincent didn't do a painting of himself dying. Vincent as a child, Vincent's funeral, all of these situations, there were no painting references, and so we didn't want to make up paintings that didn't exist. The second thing is we wanted to distinguish between the present and flashbacks. So the present of our film is in Vincent painting style, and the flashbacks are in black and white. And the third reason was actually, at the beginning of this process, I think, and Ivan, I think, you very much had this worry as well as us, was maybe it'd just be too much to have 90 minutes of full Vincent, bright, sun-bleached colour paintings moving in front of your eyes, and the alternation between the Vincent style and the black and white would actually give people's eyes a rest.
And I think that works, and people have said that to me, that it's it is very intense when you see it on a big cinema screen. The intensity of the color and the movement and so on, it's something you're not accustomed to as well. And I think that kind of gives you light and shade, which I think works.
Yeah, and there was also another advantage which we didn't think about at the time, which, as I said before, it was
was twice as fast and twice as easy to paint as the Vincent style.
Fine. So let's move down the corridor now to we've got a couple of other pieces to look at. There's the gendarme here, another character who, actually I'm not sure. I can't remember who the Martin
Herdman. He's an ex-rugby player.
Right, and you can tell.
Yeah, so he actually used to box for England and play rugby for Wales. So he's a bit of a bruiser in real life, and was fine for a tough gendarme. But Vincent never painted a gendarme, and so we had to smuggle another character from another painting to be our gendarme, and we actually chose Portrait of a One-Eyed Man. Which if any of you go to the Van Gogh Museum, you'll be able to see there. It's permanently hanging there. And, he's this pretty scary character who Vincent painted while he was in the mental institute in Saint Remy. And, he looks like he could be a criminal or a gendarme, but certainly he looks scary. So he seemed to be the right basis for us to have a gendarme. And if you have a look in the background, you'll see that there's some medals, or maybe not from this point of view, but we decided that he was a veteran of the French Indochina wars, which were taking place just a few years before Vincent went to Auvers, because very often the gendarmes were ex-soldiers, and he has a sleepy eye, which is some war wound that he has. So, he's a pretty tough character in the film.
And Martin Herdman as well. You remember when he turned up, we had an original French gendarme uniform. I don't know if it was 19th century or anyway. It was very, very old, and we couldn't fit him into it. He was so broad that even we had the costume people there, and they couldn't get him into it at all. And we thought we were going to have to. Well, we didn't think we could butcher this uniform, but in the end, the costume suppliers let us do it. But we had a slightly nervous weekend, thinking there was no way we could costume this big man.
So was it all held together with sort of ribbons at the back?
Well, you'll notice, we don't shoot him from the back anymore.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next painting that we chose to stop at, which is of Marguerite Gachet. Now, Marguerite Gachet is essentially many people have speculated was a love interest or an object of affection for Vincent, and so much of the intrigue in the story swirls around Armand trying to pull apart what the nature of the relationship between Van Gogh and Marguerite was.
Yeah, so this is an example of fiction and myth informing the film, really, because there's no real evidence, there's no hard evidence of a relationship between him and Marguerite Gachet, yet it has been the subject of novels, it's been the subject of books. And I think one of the reasons is because Marguerite Gachet, she never married. She stayed in her father's house all her life, in her tiny bedroom, which if any of you ever go to Auvers, you can go and visit it. She had this enormous portrait that Vincent did of her hanging in this tiny bedroom above her bed for 41 years. And also she used to take flowers to his grave, certainly a couple of times a week. So all of this sort of fueled speculation that there was some kind of tragic relationship between them, and certainly we exploit that in our film.
Yes, she presumably never disclosed anything, I'm assuming.
She never disclosed anything. She never gave interviews. She was a very kind of private person. And in the two paintings that Vincent did of her, you never see her face. So actually in the original, she's looking down at the keyboard. So we had a lot of fun speculating what this woman would be like when she turned her face to you and what she'll say. So hopefully we surprise people in a couple of places, and I hope this is one of them when you discover what kind of character she is.
She's certainly no shrinking violet, is she? She's a great character.
And funnily enough, she looks exactly like Oscar nominee Saoirse Ronan.
Yeah, funny that.
Yeah. So I just want to very briefly, before we go into the last room, I just want to very briefly come to this picture at the end, which is again of Armand. We don't need to sort of drill into the character anymore because we've covered him off. But this picture really spoke to me exactly of your point earlier on about that sort of film noir feeling that the film has, and absolutely sort of, you know, these moments, particularly sort of there's a particular sequence in the film where he I think it's when the boy throws something at him and he chases him, and it's a big tonal shift in the film because suddenly it's nighttime, and that was when that film noir reference really sort of came to light.
So I mean, this painting in front of you and this shot is a complete homage to film noir, you know, and just I mean, almost everywhere we own, you know, we reference Vincent paintings and we're very close to the Vincent paintings, but you know, you got to have some fun with these things, and you know, one of the things we wanted to do is have a pure film noir shot somewhere, and this is the pure film noir shot. So the reference doesn't come from Vincent paintings, it comes from other films, and a bit like with the reflection, it's like, what if, you know, he did this moonlit portrait of a brooding Armand, and some of these things, some of these nighttime paintings we had a lot of fun with. I mean, you know, Vincent did do some nighttime paintings, and after he'd cracked the color of the deep sun, the scorching sun, he wanted to crack the colors of the night. And so he did Starry Night over Rhone, Cafe Terrace at night, and also, of course, Starry Night. And even though he only did 8 paintings out of 845 surviving paintings as nighttime paintings, I think most of them are in the top 20 best-known Van Goghs of all time. So, his nighttime paintings are very famous, and we use those as reference for these kind of flights of fantasy that we took.
Yeah, fine, fantastic. I will save everybody from having my Humphrey Bogart impressions inflicted on them. I'll keep just to the Homburg hat, I think. Fine. So coming into the last room here, if we walk across this sort of causeway, the first picture in this last room, which is we just referenced in the caption as close up. This picture is another sort of quite sort of heart-stopping moment in the film. Very sort of a powerful emotional beat. It is a you know, essentially, I think you described it as the moment of truth point for Vincent himself. And it's part of a story that one of the other characters tells, which is essentially confessional. It's extremely powerful, but it also has a very extraordinary sort of structural component to it, which is that it's pretty much the first and I think the only time really in the main narrative of the film where Vincent actually looks at us.
Well, we felt that there had been a lot of films, you know, there have been 3 major biopics about Vincent which really deal with him head on. And, you know, I don't think that that's necessarily the most interesting thing. And anyway, we didn't want to repeat what other people had done. The way through Vincent is through his letters, you know, through his paintings, through the mysteries that swirl around him, like what was his illness? Did he kill himself or not? And so we really wanted to see him through other people's eyes. So we brought, you know, the paintings of the portraits of the people around him to life, to argue over who he really was. And yeah, our idea is that we present these different views and we leave it to the audience to decide who Vincent was and what really happened to him.
I think also, and tell me if I'm wrong, the impression I also get is that sort of presentational decision where so often when we see him, he is turning away from the camera, or he, is sort of bowed and looking askew. And then at this one moment in the film, at this point, he suddenly stares directly into the camera for, 2 seconds or something. And then that's all we see of him. That's also essentially, I think it's fair to say, representative of his character as well, because he was somebody who did find it difficult to deal directly with people. Is that am I interpreting that correctly as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great mysteries is what was wrong with Vincent, because if you read his letters, I mean, yeah, you can certainly feel the obsessiveness, but there's such beauty in his language and such intelligence in him, quite extraordinary, that it's always such a shock when you read biographies about him, or you read accounts about him, and he pretty much couldn't talk to anyone. He had a real difficulty communicating face to face with people. He had a real difficulty. His love life was a disaster all through his adult life. He never sustained friendships, and he really wanted this connection with people, and that's what he was striving for. And I think that's one of the reasons why his art is so amazing, is because he couldn't, despite his big heart and his incredible in intelligence and his desire to have close relationships with friends, with family, and with women, he failed miserably at that. And so it was only through his art that he could communicate his feelings, and that's why there's so much power in them.
So we have one more picture that we want to pay attention to, which is just on our right here. Then I'm going to come to some questions. I've got a list of questions that have been submitted during the course of the conversation. But before we do, let's just take a moment to pause and take a look at Dr. Gachet. Now, Dr. Gachet looms over the story, and then and is obviously a hugely important part of the story as well. But we only actually meet him very late in the story. But that sense of intrigue and mystery, and the question mark of malign intent and everything all swirls around this character, doesn't it?
He's a very mercurial character in history. There are some very positive views about him, although quite a few of those were disseminated by his son, who pretty much spent his career trying to talk up his father's role in supporting, famous artists. But there's definitely truth in the fact that he was good friends with Cézanne, with Manet, with a lot of the great painters of his time, and so there was he obviously was respected by these different artists, although they liked the fact that they could pay for their consultations with artwork, most of which weren't really worth anything at the time. But by the time his son donated Dr. Gachet's collection to the French government, it was completely priceless. There was 26 Van Goghs, several Cézannes, and a range of other artwork as well. And some people think that he was even responsible for Vincent's death. He used to be in the army. He kept a gun, so it's been speculated that the gun came from Gachet. There was certainly a falling out between Gachet and Vincent before his death, and there's been much talk about this being to do with Vincent's amorous intentions towards his daughter. And while Dr. Gachet quite liked to have an artist friend, he didn't necessarily want him marrying into the family. No. So there are all these speculations around him. And the other thing is just the portrait itself. I mean, if you go and see the portrait in the Musée d'Orsay, see the original, it's got this heartbreaking, melancholic expression on it, which, when we were writing the character, we had to come up with a character who, while he was obviously an intelligent guy who was part of the artist and bohemian culture, he seemed to be carrying this enormous guilt and sadness around with him. So
we're very happy when we found Jerome Flynn. So some of you will probably recognise him as Bronn from Game of Thrones, because he managed to really bring out this heartbreaking performance that goes with the original portrait.
So, thank you. There are obviously 30 pieces in the collection. We've wandered around and had a quick comment on 12, I think, of those 30. If we just sort of move past into this last sort of area, we can just gather quickly, and I'll run through the last questions I have from members of the community in the audience who've come here. And if we just sort of stand in a little gaggle, we can do that together. Before I dig into their questions, I'm just going to ask one last question of my own, if I may, which is an absolutely shameless plug for our next talk next week, which I'm hoping to sort of crowbar a really sort of blunt segue into at this juncture. So Julie, who's actually here tonight, Julie Lemoyne, is giving a talk next week about virtual worlds and autism, and particularly with reference to those behaviors that you were representing in the film of Van Gogh, turning away from people and struggling to be able to look people directly in the eyes and engage with them, and there being just that one moment when he does essentially look his interlocutor directly in the eyes. I guess it's a two-part question. With the experience, the detail that you've had digging into this man's life, do you have any personal particular insights into his mental condition, and was there anything particular that you were trying to represent there? And also, in general, do you think that the modern prisms that we have today of how we categorize different mental health states, does thinking about Van Gogh through that prism, does it add to our appreciation of his art in any way, or do you think it's just a distraction?
I love the fact it's still a mystery. I mean, last year, the Van Gogh Museum, who have a whole library and a number of in-house scholars, so they're the biggest. They're the biggest part of a bigger edifice of scholarship that's been going on for over 100 years now about Vincent, and no one really knows what his illness is. There have been several major theories and many minor ones beside. So I don't think he was autistic, but there was definitely. I do think that he was what we would call dyslexic to a very severe degree, because he had an encyclopedic brain in terms of his knowledge of art, and when he was a kid in terms of collecting insects and eggs and nests. So, but on the other hand, he failed miserably to pass any of any academic exams. So I do think that he was a severe dyslexic but not onto the autistic scale. He definitely had some form of severe depression, what we call nowadays bipolar. And then in terms of when that kind of went up to another level, and he went into the mental institute, there was something going on there, which he had hallucinations. He had fits. He would be singing. He would be in rages. He pretty much didn't know what was going on for up to 2 weeks at a time, and it was quite a terrifying experience for him. I do think there was a large contingent of environmental factors that led to that breakdown. This is a guy who used to have up to 60 cups of coffee a day. He also was drinking pretty heavily at the same time as having that much coffee. He smoked all the time. And he often didn't eat very well or necessarily drink much water. So, and he was working under the midday sun in southern France. So all those combination of factors together over a period of time when he's working incredibly hard and sort of coming up with a new vision for art. I'm surprised he didn't break down sooner, to be honest. And he always said that it was his work that cracked his mind, but he wasn't a normal person to begin with. You can see from his struggles with people that there was something going on there. But yeah, I love the fact that it's still a mystery and that all these scholars can't work out what was wrong with him or what happened to him.
Sure. I've got another question about his sort of state of mind from Joey here, who's asking if Vincent's older brother's death during childbirth, do you think that affected his relationship with his mother, and was that a key sort of spur, spur to his adult persona and the engine that drove his art?
Yeah, so what happened, which is quite a little bit freaky, was that he had an older stillborn brother who was also called Vincent van Gogh, who was born exactly 1 year before him. So there was a couple of things in his life that happened on his birthday. One was, that was the 1 year anniversary of his older brother's death, and he doesn't really make mention to it, but it has been a factor that's been put forward by psychiatrists that this was the Vincent van Gogh he should have been, because he was the eldest surviving son. He was meant to be kind of the patriarch in the making, whereas his younger brother Theo, who had to take care of him, and Vincent was always a disappointment as an eldest son and a black sheep of the family. So he doesn't mention it directly, and there was obviously a different view of children dying young in those days because it was much more common than it is now. But it's an interesting theory. Just also to mention that birthdays weren't necessarily as important as they are today, and they actually buried Vincent's father on Vincent's birthday. So which gives you some idea of how little regard they necessarily paid to birthdays.
Yeah, really. Not. Don't assume they didn't then go off and start blowing up balloons and blowing out candles. So I have a couple of questions about the method, and then a couple of questions about the film release and where it is, and then we can wrap up. We have run over a little bit, but I'll get through these very quickly. So we have a question from Adam. A couple of questions actually. With so many artists working on the project, how did you sort of manage consistency and continuity? I'm very interested in this question because there was only one moment where I really felt I was watching a sort of stark transition from one artist to another, and it's sort of I thought about it, which in itself is quite extraordinary given the nature of what was going on. And his supplementary question is also how many paintings were lost to the cutting room floor.
Okay, so in the first question, we had 6 supervisors. Painting supervisors who were all, the painting animators who'd been with us the longest, and they were supervising the other painters. And then every single frame was approved by Dorota, and if it wasn't enough in the style of the film, then she would send it back and they'd have to paint it again. And these paintings took a long time, so people didn't like doing that. So they very, very quickly got into the style of the film, and we had that kind of supervising structure. And at the beginning we only had 20 painters, so it was much easier to supervise them, and then once we brought on other painters, we didn't really have to look after the 20 original painters so much, and we had this kind of supervising capacity. So the worst time was when we had all the painters working at once, and Dorota had to go through 800 paintings a day. But that was only for the last 3 months of production, so that was pretty intensive for her, just to keep track of it all. But I mean, she had experienced people helping her, so it went okay. But we would have been happier to have more. Not to have so many painters in such a short space of time. So that was a challenge for us to get them up to speed very quickly. In terms of the second one, it was kind of it was a bit of a rule. Well, it was definitely a rule not to cut shots once they've been painted, because just so much went into them. So we did the editing at the storyboard stage. We did editing at the layout stage, in the pre-visualization stage in the computer, and then also at the live action stage. Once we shot all the live action, then we did a lot of editing. We discussed it a lot with Ivan and with David in terms of making sure that we really believed in the story narrative at that stage, because it was just a bit soul destroying to cut out shots once they've been painted, because someone could have been painting that for 3 months and it might have been all that they ever did on the film. So
So also the budget was very tight, and there was a cost per painting, and to paint it and not use it, just given how tight everything was heartbreaking in other ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Wallet breaking. So in effect, so almost what you're saying is that the entire painting process was almost the post-production process, and that the film had already been made, essentially a cut at that point.
Yeah, the story was completely in place. The narrative was in place, and then the painting process was really the final stage. It was just a very involved and laborious and painstaking final stage compared to on other films.
So my last few questions coming in here are relating to where it's going to show and so on and so forth. So I've got Joey and David asking, where is it going to run? Is it playing in most countries? Is it going to be translated? Is a great question. Is it going to, James asking, is it going to be on Netflix and Amazon Prime? I know we've got some specific release dates for US, UK and the Netherlands and Ireland, which you're going to talk through. Do you want to just comment on some of those other points as well? Other countries, before we go through those specific dates?
We've sold it to 135 countries. There are a couple of countries in Central Africa and Central South America that we haven't sold it to, but the rest of the world we have sold it to. It will be getting a cinema release pretty much everywhere on the globe. It's going to start in America, in New York on the 22nd of September, LA and San Francisco on the 29th, and then rolling out to many more cities starting from the 6th of October. In Poland, it comes out on the 6th of October. In France on the 11th of October. In Britain
UK
on the
13th.
In Britain, we have the premiere on the 9th, which is a simultaneous screening in 200 cinemas across the UK and Ireland, and it will have a live introduction from us and a question and answers with the cast afterwards. We will be in the National Gallery where it's also screening. If there's anyone from the UK, please come and join that event. It's going to be quite a special event. In Holland, we've got a premiere at the Van Gogh Museum, and then it's coming out in cinemas on the 26th of October. In Germany, it's one of the latest countries to come out. It's going to be the 28th of December. It's going to have a dub in German. It's already got a dub in French. And those are the only two that I know about at the moment. I think there's a dub already done in Russian. I believe there will be a couple of other languages that will be covered as well, but those are the ones that I know about at the moment. And I only know about the cinema release at the moment. I don't know what will be happening after the cinema release. Ivan, I don't think we have any details beyond cinema. Yeah.
No, I mean, it'll vary from territory to territory. It'll be they'll then sell it on to online platforms and TV and so on. So yeah, it will likely be on Netflix or Amazon in certain territories, but it will vary, and that will be sometime after the cinema release.
But we've encouraged people to see it on the big screen because we do think that it's worth it. And Rowan, I know that you saw it on the big screen, so
Yeah, well worth it, James. I would strongly encourage you, if you can get to a cinema near you, to see if it is going to be on. So I have one last question here, which is from Mary, which relates to the exhibitions. Obviously, we have had a wonderful time today touring the virtual exhibition, but there are real exhibitions of these real artworks. There's actually a poster behind us for one coming up in the Netherlands. We've got a question from Mary. Are there any planned exhibitions of the artwork anywhere in the United States? Do you want to just give us an update? Because I know you've got exhibitions all over the place planned as well.
Well, the main exhibition is going to be in Noord-Brabant Museum in Den Bosch in the Netherlands, opening on the 13th of October. And we'll have 119 of the very best paintings from the film in that exhibition, and we go into more depth about how we made the film and the historical context. And I would love to. That's going to be running from the 13th of October to the 28th of January, and I do hope that we will then send that exhibition on to the US, because that's our kind of biggest territory, and this is our biggest exhibition. We also are likely to have exhibitions in Shenzhen, in China, in Hong Kong, and we're going to have a taster exhibition of the Krüller-Müller exhibition, Loving Vincent exhibition, which is where we're doing it in collaboration with the Krüller-Müller Museum from the Netherlands, which has the second largest Van Gogh collection in the world. And we show how we bring to life the paintings in the film that are actually on display in the Netherlands. And that's going to be in Ede, in Holland on the 8th and the 9th, on the 7th and the 8th of October. And then that will be going on tour to Asia. So that's what we've got planned at the moment. But I do hope that we will get the big exhibition over to the US.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And am I right? Sorry, Ivan, did you also mention something about Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, that's it needs that needs an extensive set of permissions from the high Hegians of Saudi Arabia, but that's in process and maybe happening.
Oh, fantastic. I wasn't sure whether that was confirmed or not. I've just had feedback indirectly saying that for James, sadly, it's a 9-hour drive to get to the big screen. I know that James is somewhere in the United States of America, and I'm guessing not in the middle of Manhattan. So
don't worry. We're going to add, as long as people go to see it in New York and LA and Chicago and the other cities, then it'll keep going to more cinemas. So
yeah.
Just tell him to encourage all his friends who live less than 9 hours away to go and see it, and then it will come to a cinema near him.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have all had the opportunity to see the first exhibition of the artworks. Then I think here in the Delphi Talks, we've run on a little bit, but that's because there was so much of a fascinating story to tell. I'd like to ask everybody to thank Hugh and Ivan for their time today. Unfortunately, actually, I've just realised the clap button is contextualised in the theatre, and we're not there. So I'll ask you to sort of say lots of thank yous in the chat channel. Hugh, I know that you are rushed off your feet doing the launch, so we massively appreciate your taking your time today. Ivan, joining us from your yacht as well. We're very appreciative to all of you. Thank you very much, and we hope everybody makes it to the cinema to see this film. I have to say I was blown away by it from the moment I saw the first clips to getting the chance to see it last week. It's absolutely fantastic. And thanks everyone for turning up today. The next show will be next Tuesday the 19th, and as I say, that is Julie Lemoyne talking about autism and virtual reality and augmented reality. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your interest.
Thanks guys. Take care.
Bye bye.